This morning we are going to be in the Proverbs, chapter 17, specifically 3 different verses that speak on the same topic of chapter 17. And this message was inspired by something I read in the newspaper this week, on Wednesday actually. And so I will get to that in just a moment. But there's our intro scene. If you're not familiar with those two, I think some of you probably know at least what one of those two comes from. The one on the left, certainly. West Side Story, the quintessential American gangs that dance as they fight, odd sort of rendition of that story. And the one on the right is from The Outsiders, a book that a lot of teenagers read in middle school about fighting between the rich kids and the poor kids in a small town. Now we're going to be talking about strife this morning, about arguments and quarrels and why we're not real fans of either one. By way of introduction, let me share with you the headline from this Wednesday's Grand Rapids Press. Now this is an interesting one, and the reason why it inspired this message is because I've never seen a headline like this before. The headline was, "Pastor Not Guilty in Assault Case." You don't see that every day, hopefully, thankfully. Now, let me just give you some of the background without getting into the specifics of what church and all those things. We'll leave that be. If you want to look it up in the paper, it's there. It was a 74-year-old church, not a new church, a church with an established tradition. The incident involved a, coincidentally, 74-year-old woman who was bumped by her pastor. She didn't fall down, she got bumped, she leaned back and grabbed her pew and everything was fine. And you're thinking, okay, how did that end up in an assault charge? Something that actually went to a trial and to a jury that found him not guilty. Let me give you a little more background. You see, she was bumped because he was trying to leave the church following an argument after the service. In the back of the church, he was greeting people as typical. Someone started an argument that was going and getting heated, and he said, "You know what, I gotta get out of here." Turned to leave and ran into her. Accidentally. She said it was accidental, he said it was accidental, and yet despite of this, it ended up in that situation. In the public eye, in a trial, he resigned. His career is probably in jeopardy, and it may have been ruined. And what was it about? Well, the paper didn't give specifics, but let me give you the general notion. It was an ongoing problem that had been building their church for 2 years. And it was compounded by some recent staff changes, by some members of the staff that had been let go. And the people were upset. But why is there an argument happening in the church? And how does a problem last for 2 years without someone being able to fix it? Who's to blame? I have no idea. All I have is press coverage. I have no idea if it's both, it's some, if it's everybody. Who knows? But when a problem within the church ends up in an assault charge against the pastor and parishioners testifying in open court against him, let me tell you, nobody is going to win. The only people that win are people that enjoy mocking the church and laughing at us, because that doesn't look good, no matter who is to blame. Well, let's look at these 3 verses from Proverbs to see if we can gain an insight about strife and quarreling and arguments, and hopefully we'll come to something that will help us out. The first verse is verse 1 of chapter 17. "Better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife." You see, strife tends to ruin everything. You may have material possessions, you may have money, you may have fame, but what are they worth without peace of mind? You see, our culture tends to celebrate those who crawl over the bodies of others in order to achieve success, don't they? We don't care how you got there, we don't care who you stepped on to get there, your own mother if need be sometimes, right? As long as you get success. But what of the human cost? Shouldn't that matter the most instead of being an afterthought? Oh, by the way, I ruined my marriage and my kids and everything to get here. Oops. Shouldn't that have been something that was considered ahead of time? Because we're kidding ourselves when we make success at all cost our goal. Reminded me when I was considering this verse of a documentary I saw a few years ago called The Curse of the Lottery Winners. And it was that same day's newspaper, oddly enough. Flip the page, and what do I see but two other headlines? Here they are. Lotto winner on food stamps. Interesting. And slaying suspect, a lotto winner. The same paper. One page away. In that documentary, they examined the lives of people who had won the big lotto. Now we're talking, I'm not talking the $2 million prize. We're talking multiple jackpot winners. And each and every one of the people that they told their story, their lives were ruined by the wealth that they received. In some cases, their family came out of the woodworks to beg for money. And every relationship they had with a family member was ruined because of the money. In other cases, a marriage that had been happy up until that point ended up in divorce because of the money. In some cases, violence ensued, drug use, and all sorts of things. People at the end of their interviews said, I wish I'd never won. My life was ruined by this. Wealth with strife is a bad deal to make. You see a home or a church or a town that is torn apart by strife is headed for ruin. And greed is usually the number one cause behind strife. You know what? We should choose peace. It's worth it. Peace doesn't happen on its own. The people of God have to desire it and have to work for it. Remember Matthew 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. Because peace is made by those who serve God, and those who serve God make peace. It's a tried and true axiom. It doesn't really matter how much you have to give up in order to achieve it. What good are the things you have in comparison to peace? The house, the cars, the stuff. If you don't have peace with your family members, with your loved ones, with your neighbors, what good are they? And conversely, a little more personally, how important is your pride if it ends up getting you punched in the mouth? I know we think about such things. We think, my pride's important to me. But it sometimes leads you in that direction. So let's look at another verse and see if we can get some additional insight. Verse 9. He who covers over an offense promotes love, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. We know about mountains and molehills, don't we? We have a phrase about that. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. In other words, don't make a little problem into a big problem. Because any small problem can lead to a quote-unquote war, to a Hatfields versus McCoy's kind of situation, to a all-out blood feud. When people try to add fuel to the fire, but even a major mistake, even a huge screw-up, can be smoothed over by peacemakers. Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of people who are trying to make peace or people who are trying to make war? What motives are we following? What goals do we have in mind? You see, God favors the problem solver, not the problem starter. How do we cover over an offense? The verse says, he who covers over an offense promotes love. But how do you do that? What does covering over an offense mean? Well, one thing that we need to do is to adopt a forgiving heart. And we do that by remembering that we ourselves are not perfect. In other words, we begin to imitate Christ. We begin to say, you know what? We can forgive. We can forget. We can move on. The difference between a busybody, which nobody needs, and a peacemaker, which everybody needs, is often simply a matter of intent. What are you trying to accomplish here? What is your goal? What are you hoping for? The rest of us need to remember that we need to support those who are trying to mend fences in our family, in our neighborhood. But what is so bad? The verse says, whoever repeats a matter separates close friends. What's so bad about repeating something that you hear? What's so bad about that? Well, when much harder for the person in the wrong to ask forgiveness because more people know about it. And therefore that person has to be a lot more humble to ask forgiveness because everybody's going to hear about that too. So it's a matter of pride. It's more difficult. And when everybody knows about it, it's harder for the person who is wrong to forgive because they have to deal with their own pride too. So the more people know, the harder it is for the situation to be resolved. When more people become involved, a small problem becomes a big problem in a hurry. It may have started off between two people, but now that dozens are involved on both sides, we don't have a small problem anymore. Keep in mind that the only difference between a fight and a riot is the number of people involved. When a relative or a friend is involved, does it not make it more difficult? We become personally involved. We take a stake in the outcome. We can't let it go either because we feel involved. Once again, making it harder to fix the problem. That's what's wrong with repeating. It's also bad to repeat things because old wounds should be left alone. An injury is not going to heal when people keep bringing it up and reopening it. It discourages those who seek forgiveness when others choose to throw their mistakes back in their face. They say, holy cow, I apologized, I sought forgiveness, and yet now you're throwing this back in my face. Why would I ever do that again? And it causes new pain to those who were hurt by an incident when others choose to haul it back out in the open. Let it go. The verse says it separates close friends. Is it really worth losing your best friend over this argument, over this debate, over this issue? Now it may not come to that, but every time we choose to be a troublemaker rather than a peacemaker, we risk all of our closest relationships. Think about that. Did you really consider that? Last time you were in the midst of an argument, your pride was up and you were all excited about the situation. Did you really consider, you know what, I could be losing my closest friends from this, if this blows up? How many divorces? We got a problem with that in our country. How many divorces could have been prevented if people on the outside were working for peace instead of their own petty goals? If they were actually trying to help the couple mend their problems. To choose pride or anger over a relationship with someone we're supposed to love is to devalue that person whom God has created in His own image. To say that